Before we get started with this episode of the Musical Innertube, we have, fittingly, some late-breaking news.
Worldwide News Network is a 24-hour national radio news service that hopes to take the place of CBS News Radio, which is gone. Red Apple Media, the network's parent company, said in a release that the network's goal is to be fact-driven and worldwide.
And one of the first news anchors hired for this new network is Bill Rickoff, who you will hear on this very podcast.
Congrats to Bill, and good luck to the Worldwide News Network. And now, on with the podcast.
And now, we return you to the Musical Innertube, already in progress.
What is this thing? What's this podcast?
Welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
I'm John Timpane.
We just talk to interesting people about interesting stuff. Today on the podcast, I thought we would look at news, radio news specifically, because as we all know, CBS Radio News is going the way of dust. We wanted to know about exactly how news affects people and how people affect news. So I went to people that I have worked with in the business in the past on local and network news. I thought we would talk about the difference between the two and whether or not they're affected by the ongoing onslaught from things like Twitter and that as using Twitter and Instagram as news sources as opposed to the news sources that we've used in the past. So let me do some introductions here. We have Bill Rickoff with us. Bill is a public affairs instructor at the Defense Information School at Fort Meade in Maryland. He worked for CBS News from 2017 until 2020. Bill and I worked in the same market, but not necessarily at the same station in Harrisburg at Radio News for a while. And Bill has also worked for WCBS AM in New York, WNEW FM in Washington, D.C., and KDKA AM in Pittsburgh. Bill, welcome to the Musical
Thank you very
Innertube.
much, John. Appreciate you inviting me for this.
Nick Roman is with us. Nick has been on the show before. From 84 to 2004, he was a reporter, anchor, and news director at KLON and KKJZ in Long Beach. And from 2004 to 2024, he worked at KPCC, which is known as LAist, as a news editor and later local host of NPR's All Things Considered. Nick also taught broadcast journalism for 30 years at Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Fullerton. Welcome back to the show, Nick.
Thank you so much.
And we have Don Bryant with us. Don currently runs his own media company in Dover, New Hampshire. He's been news director at WTSN in Dover and news and public affairs director at WOKQ and The Shark for Town Square Media in New Hampshire. Anything else you're doing, Don?
Playing a lot of golf.
There you go. That's important. And that's important in the news business. I just wanted to throw out that I started out as an air personality, which is a formal name that we use for disc jockeys. As a matter of fact, I was a disc jockey in Dover, New Hampshire, at WTSN when Don was the news director. By the time I got to Harrisburg, I was an air personality. The station I was working at was going under. Another station across town asked me if I'd ever done news because they had an opening and they wanted to hire me on. And I said, yes, I'd done it once as a fill-in Long Beach, California, right after I got out of college. But that was enough for them. They said, okay, they hired me on. I wound up working 15 years in Harrisburg as a news reporter, anchor, news director, TV reporter, TV weatherman. And in the middle of it, in 85 and 86, 87, I took a couple years off to work for CNN when they desperately tried to start a radio news service and desperately failed. And John's here. Hi, John.
How you doing?
Let's just throw it out to anybody. The network news and local news is something that people rely on for more than just news. They also rely on it for traffic and weather and all the other things that affect everybody's day-to-day business. So what's the position of network news, nationwide news, at this point in people's lives?
Well, I can talk about NPR because NPR provides top of the hour and bottom of the hour newscasts for stations, hundreds of stations across the country. Despite all of what happened last year with the defunding effort aimed at public broadcasting, NPR is doing just fine. They got a $113 million donation in the last few weeks that will, as I understand it, be placed, put toward expanding service on various digital platforms and moving to, to deliver news wherever the audience gets it. And as it turns out, this morning I had a long conversation with the managing editor at my old station at LA in Los Angeles. She talked a lot about that's Mary Plummer, and Mary talked an awful lot about the efforts that my old station is doing in Los Angeles to getting stories on as many different platforms as possible. So there's a video element, there's a social media element through Instagram primarily. There are efforts to expand the digital offerings of the station, hit people with newsletters through emails. So although we are primarily a broadcast station, the effort is all across the board. And with NPR in a very strong position, especially in the last year, I think when people sort of got the idea that if they don't support public radio, it goes away. Things are good in public radio. I'm not going to say they're great because a lot of small stations get hurt, but for bigger stations and for NPR, they're doing fine, and actually they're grabbing a larger audience of the local, a larger percentage of the local broadcast audience.
So I wonder if I might follow up with that and talk a little bit about my alma mater at CBS News and talk a bit about, the decision to shut that down did not necessarily seem to be one of revenue solely. Certainly, money plays into the hands, and with the mega mergers that have been going on that have taken CBS and its parent company, Paramount, in recent years, and another one that's pending now, a mega merger with Paramount and some other things that may well affect. There was, a big decision that was made to shut down the entire news operation. Now, CBS News Radio has been doing cuts over the past 5 years. I was in the first round during COVID in 2020, where they laid off a number of us. Pam Coulter, who was one of our Washington correspondents, was another one who was let go with me. And they have systematically continued reductions, not just on the radio side, but across all of CBS's news platforms and across the broader company. But the decision to knock down CBS News, they say they want to take, or CBS News Radio, that is, they said they want to, cut the costs. They want to see other viable digital platforms. But I would point to the successes of NPR. I would also point to the success of ABC, who was our chief competitor at the time. And I think we had more affiliates than ABC at the time when I was let go. But ABC has been able to pivot to what they now call ABC Audio. They're not ABC Radio anymore. And so they are promoting uh, a number of different platforms that include video. I see my former colleague from CBS News, Stephen Portnoy, who's now their Washington correspondent. I see him showing up on video all the time. And so they've embraced the idea that ABC is a company that provides news and information on video, on web, and on audio. And audio is just one of those things that is included anymore. So I think the smart companies are doing, and we can talk about this a little bit later on too, how local radio operators such as Odyssey, the former CBS radio, which owned the local stations around the country, how they're beginning to capitalize on streaming and audio and things like that to keep radio alive. But just there have been some wholesale changes. I will just offer my opinion that at CBS News Radio, I think there was something larger at foot that caused the shutdown of the entire network.
Don, Brian, you used at some of the stations you worked at, the top of the hour news was provided by a network. What does that mean to a station? Again, we heard that some 700 stations across the country are airing CBS News at the top of the hour and will lose it when CBS dies. What would that mean for local operators?
Well, the station that I worked at with the network was ABC, and they were obviously right there at the top of the hour, and also you could pull them in or any other time. If you don't have that block that is giving you the national, international news, you've got to fill it in somehow. And I'm not sure that local news stations, if they have any news at all anymore, have the personnel that would be able to do that. I mean, they'd have to rely strictly on the wire service for all of that, and you're not going to get the information that you would need. It's and even the local part of it is gone, at least in this area, because of consolidation with all of these radio stations. There are very few local news people anymore. The morning guy is reading news stories at the top of the hour, and other stations just have done away with their news departments. It's even carried over to the local newspapers around here.
Oh, yeah.
Back when there used to be 5 reporters in each of the cities covering the various aspects of city government, they have one reporter who's covering an entire region. So there is no local news in the newspaper.
Well, John, you worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer for a while. You know
Yeah.
about the loss of local newspapers. And with the loss of local newspapers, one would think local radio might step into that void. That's not necessarily happening. But, with local newspapers and local radio gone in a lot of markets, what's left?
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of scrabbling about, and I was just thinking as I was hearing the rest of our guests weigh in that I had a chance to see the turnover and the embrace, at least fitful embrace of online resources from the newspaper side. That we realized that there was some advantage in getting our reporting done early and getting it online first. And that was one of the things we got better and better at. And I'm talking about around the year 2005, and we got better and better at speeding up our reporting so that we could get up online with breaking news as quickly as we could. And of course, we just got better and better at that as the technology got better, because at first it was rather clunky. It was rather hard to post things online. You all remember those days. And the difficulty of posting a color JPEG, for example, was enormous as of 2000. And by 2010, it was much easier. And by 2020, it was even easier. What's happening in Philadelphia now, I notice, is somehow the Inquirer is holding on. It is repositioning itself. It's much more online than it was. It's much smaller. There's still, tens of thousands of people who get a print product. And there are lots of ways in which print is the better invention. and everybody tells us that, but not, what's happened is, first of all, the local, stations that I think of, the WHYY, which is a public broadcasting station. They are the single most important local news station also, and they have made a commitment stretching back into the last millennium. They started doing local news with a vengeance in the 80s. So they have a very robust online presence. Basically an entire online diversified kind of set of offerings targeted to a lot of different things, and mostly to their own broadcasting, which you would expect. But they are both a radio station and a website, so they're hoping to serve you 24/7, even if you're not listening. You can read or watch some of their offerings. And I know Nick will say, well, yes, we were doing that too. And of course you were. In other words, I think it was easiest for radio stations actually to embrace it, because radio stations, in some ways, it was harder for print folks to make that change.
Well, and KYW is still, I think, I was looking at some Nielsen ratings for March of 2026, which tells you, your number one station and that kind of thing. KYW All News is still number 4 in Philadelphia. WINS, WINS All News in New York is number 2. KNX All News in LA is number 6. LAS, Nick's old station, is number 16. In Chicago, WBBM, the all-news station, is number 2. Again, KNX, WBBM, WINS is not a CBS station, is it, Bill?
No, the Winds is now the Odyssey station, right? So the
Okay.
Odyssey is the company that took over the CBS stations, and
Okay.
sadly, they shut down WCBS a couple of years ago, which left Winds as the only game in town.
What I'm thinking here is that radio news still has a place, but I would assume when you um, match what they call a quarter hour, which is every 15 minutes, how many people are listening, to the total what they call the total cumulative number of people that are listening. These all news stations do very well in the quarter hours, but they don't do well in the total number of people listening, which
Interesting.
tells me that people are listening in their cars on the way to work or whatever. They're checking in for the weather or traffic updates or as much as they're looking for the news. Don Brian, in a place like Dover, New Hampshire, your TV comes from Boston and from Maine and from Manchester, but the radio is local. When radio news and local newspapers, start to dive, um, and all of your local news sources come from outside, from bigger cities outside your market, what happens?
Like you said, people pick up their phone and they're looking at Twitter and Instagram, or like around here, a lot of the Facebook websites. What's happening in Dover? What's officially happening in Dover? There are competing sites all trying to get the news out to you. But my problem is, it's news that Joe Blow is putting out there, and everybody believes it. There's no confirmation from. I mean, I wouldn't put a news story on unless I got confirmation of what was happening. But there's no confirmation of any of these stories. But that's where people are getting their news, off their telephones.
Yeah, and I've had people come to me here in Harrisburg and say, "Well, sign up for neighborhood news," which is something that you get on a. I get it on my phone, either email or text, and it's yeah, you're right. It's people saying, "Hey, I saw cop cars over at Fourth Street at Jim's house. I wonder what's going on over there." But that doesn't tell me any of the news. That's like I said, that's rumor. But Bill Rakoff and Nick, you both talked about ABC and NPR going heavily into video and online. Is there any way that this can trickle down further to get into the local area, do you think? Or
Yes, yes, and I want to point out a great example of that is, and Town Square Media is one of them. And I just had a fascinating conversation with some Town Square folks out on the West Coast, out in Washington State, and they talked about how they are just evolving, and radio is just a part of what they do now, and that if you're on the air as a news person, chances are you're writing a web article and you're going to put some video if you've got it in there, and you're also going to do that thing for the radio. So it's like I said earlier, radio is just a component of the job now, and I think that's what's going to be necessary. Let me also point out my other alma mater at KDKA out in Pittsburgh, Odyssey station, and what they have done is they put cameras in the studio. You can now log on and you can watch their entire programming online. And I was talking with my friend, I'll name shout, Marty Griffin, who's their midday host out there. And he was telling me that they are making a killing on advertising revenue from the stream more than they are their over the air signal right now. So they're doing the over the air signal because, again, of the people who listen when they're in the cars, when they are checking in here and there, it's still a viable platform, but they're finding that they're making much more money off the stream. And they think that people can capitalize, and companies can capitalize on that. So yeah, it's trickling down. I see it. Odyssey's doing it at the major market level, but great companies like Town Square are also starting to get into this. And maybe you can speak more to that.
When I worked for Town Square, that was what they were doing. Basically, the on-air stuff was promoting the website. They were directing everybody to the website, and
Sure.
there was a great income stream from that website. And I was in the news department, but I had to post 4 articles every single day to the website, not necessarily hard news articles, but I just had to post 4 stories per day.
and Nick, we've talked in the past about And you have a podcast as well that talks to present and former NPR reporters and anchors about their experiences. And what I get from a lot of them and listening to a lot of their stories is that in a lot of smaller towns, we think of NPR as public radio, and public radio is more concerned with the arts, but local stations are very concerned with local news and getting out there and getting things reported. And again, the thing that seems to disappear when local newspapers and local radio stations go away is the coverage of the school boards and the city councils and all of the things that are passing laws that affect people right there on the grassroots level. And what you've said a number of times is that when the money goes away for NPR, those smaller cities and towns out in the hinterlands that are depending on an NPR station for local news are the ones that suffer. So where do we go from there?
Well, yeah. Where you go is you have to upgrade your marketing to make sure that you can convince listeners to of the dire need for them to step up and support, and we have seen some of that. CPB has gone away, but a new group has come forward with grants. Public Media Bridge Fund has come forward with grants for the most at-risk stations to make sure that they can survive until they can kind of get their feet on the ground. For the bigger stations, like the one that I worked at, LAist, or as John mentioned, WHYY, KUOW in Seattle, WBEZ, Chicago, WNYC, New York, WGBH, WBUR in Boston. Those are the big stations, the big public radio stations. They have strong marketing teams and they have an urban area to support what they do. I know that WNYC, as soon as the money was pulled, one of the things that they did was begin offering the national shows that they produce without fees, so that stations can continue to air them. But it's going to take a big effort to make sure that those smaller stations can stay together. One of the things that has happened that I'm seeing more of is a combination of stations throughout a region. So you take like Gulf States newsroom, which includes the public stations that provide news in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. So they combine stories so that they can cover a region. Same kind of thing happens at Blue Ridge Public Radio in the western part of North Carolina. Same thing happens at Boise State Public Media, which is at Boise State University. Talked to the news director there. And then a lot of these stations are also partnered with Report for America, which prepares actually more than 100 young reporters for assignments all across the country each year. And that then those reporters can go to a station, say like Boise State, have their salary augmented for a certain period of time, specialize on particular coverage, whether it's public health or it's environmental or it's criminal justice or whatever it might be. So all of these kind of efforts on the public side are what sustain the entire system and sustain the local stations. And in a lot of the smaller places, commercial radio is nowhere to be found. Obviously, it's different in New York or in Philadelphia or Los Angeles. But if you're in Boise State Public Media is the ball game. Blue Ridge Public Radio was there when Hurricane Helene flooded it, those small towns and canyons and valleys on the western part. Texas Standard, which is the evening news program for all the public stations in Texas. When that flood happened a year ago and wiped out that kids' camp, the reporters from the various stations combined, they are still covering all the stories related to that. Same with St. Louis Public Media when a tornado a year ago hit. So all of these stations have figured out actually, I won't say they've figured out, but they are getting better at working together with one another, sharing resources, and staying on the story. One other thing, and this has to do with KQED in San Francisco. About a year and a half ago, what they did, on-air branding used to be KQED Public Radio. They dropped the public radio. Now they just call themselves KQED News. because they're in the news ball game in the San Francisco Bay Area. They've got the biggest signal. They have a great audience, and they have a lot of good reporters. So I'm very pleased that public radio has stepped up. I mean, it's been my whole career since 1980 that I've been involved in public broadcasting. I had never expected that we would get to this kind of prominence, but we have, despite Congress pulling all that funding. And by the way, when they pulled the funding, that was the best publicity we could ever have gotten. We wouldn't have paid for that to be in the headlines day after day after day after day, and for others to make the case for the dire need to support it. And I know that John mentioned Billy Penn. That's out of WHYY in Philadelphia. That's a public station. WBEZ in Chicago operates the Sun Times, which used to be one of the big newspapers. It's nonprofits now that are moving into the journalism area, and as the commercial media part sort of slides away and struggles.
And nonprofits are running the Philadelphia Inquirer now. They are running a newspaper in Baltimore. They're taking over a newspaper in Lancaster, and they're taking over a newspaper in Pittsburgh, Bill.
Yep.
The old Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
They saved that newspaper.
They did.
They did.
It was going away.
Absolutely did.
Yeah.
They did. And it was a heritage newspaper as much as, the Boston Globe and the New York Times. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was the voice of Pittsburgh for a long time.
Yeah.
That was my hometown, and I grew up and I thought for a city of that size, we were ridiculously lucky to be a 2-newspaper town for many, many years. And the Post-Gazette was just weeks away from shutting down when the Banner's parent company said, we're going to come in and we're going to buy it. And so that's fantastic news for them.
Again, we're talking about networks being formed. We're talking about nonprofits stepping in. We're talking about expanding to where the people are, that is online, to get the news out. What else can we do, Don, especially in a small area like yours, to get legitimate news out where people don't have to rely on gossip?
Get somebody to buy the radio stations and commit to spending money on local news. But it's all revenue generated, obviously, and it's not profitable anymore.
And that's unfortunately going to leave a lot of smaller towns and a lot of regions, smaller regions. I know that there are huge swaths of the West that are in the Midwest, places like Arkansas and as far north as Montana that are serviced by maybe 1 or 2 stations. And if those stations aren't there anymore, and the newspapers aren't there anymore because they go under because of funding, there's no reliable local news. So even if even if ABC and NPR, stay on the schneid and get their stuff out there, we'll have national news, but we won't have reports on what's happening with the local school board or the local mayor or the local city council. And that's really important stuff for people to know. I mean, when I was working local news in Harrisburg, we covered the State House because it's here Harrisburg is the state capital, so the State House was here. But we also covered the local school boards and the local town supervisors because, that was where the news or the stuff that was affecting people on a day-to-day basis was happening, and they needed to know what their school board was going to do, because if they were going to change a curriculum, that was going to change what the kids learned. And some people were for that or against that, and would stand up and make their voices heard at the school board meetings. And you needed a reporter there to say, hey, this is what people are yelling about, and this is what the board is reacting to. And
I mean, there is a market for it. There is, if you could find a way, and I agree, the business model has not been discovered yet to find a way to make money this way. But I remember years and years ago at the paper, we were very well aware that what made the wheels turn most were things like the Little League scores, things that people couldn't get anywhere else except in the newspaper. Also, people were really into the weather, right? The long-term weather forecasts. They liked that, and they liked and very, very locally, several times we tried to farm out local versions of the newspaper to different regions, and they were very good. Like there was a South Jersey insert for the Inquirer, and there was a Delaware County insert, and for a while they did very well until it was deemed too expensive. But they were popular. You know what I mean? The people really read those things. So I agree that it may be that you go to a three-stream model where you have a sugar daddy who has lots of money, that is the foundation, and you try to also get subscriptions and ads. Those are the three streams. You're laughing at me, Don, but what can I say?
Well, the trouble is that it's those sugar daddies that have a lot of money that have bought all of these stations and consolidated them and are making more money by not having to pay for personnel.
Right,
And
exactly.
to that point, I just want to add on the breaking news as we're going on the air here. And I don't know if you've seen the reports, but it looks like iHeart and Sirius XM are talking about potentially merging to get a hold of the burgeoning podcast industry. And there is a report out there that suggests that the entertainment mogul, Irving Azoff, might actually wind up buying both companies and put it under his umbrella. And so just imagine the possibilities. And I say that with a dwindling smile.
Well, Don, Nick, and I have, of course, grown very wealthy from our podcast. So we saw this coming. Right, Nick?
Yeah, I have dozens and dozens of loyal listeners.
Yes.
But the thing about it is that there are a few podcasts, and it's like anything else. There's a few, the cream of the crop do make a lot of money, and there's a lot of different stories as to why and how.
Well,
Who
let's
sets,
let's go back to when I was an air personality. All right, a disc jockey, and people would say, I was a disc jockey in Dover, New Hampshire. Which how many people in Dover, Don? 100?
30,000.
Yeah, 30,000. And people would say, "Oh, you're on the air. You must make a lot of money." And I said, "No, Don Imus makes money. Howard Stern makes money. Don Rooney does not." that's just the way it is. And so, I mean, I'm sure it's the same thing for podcasts. John and I aren't making a nickel off this thing. Nick isn't making a nickel off of his, but Joe Rogan is rolling in dough. So again, it depends on what level you're talking about. But again, money drives everything.
I can tell you a great story about that. A couple of years ago, one of my stops on my career in between radio is I worked at the Hill during the 2016 campaign when Hillary Clinton was running against Donald Trump. And my job was to secure big shot opinion pieces from big names and things like that. But so I had a great relationship with Bob Cusack, the then editor, and a lot of the staff there. And as we were getting close to the 2024 presidential campaign, I noticed that The Hill was one of the very few political outlets that did not have a podcast. And here I am, a radio guy out of work, and I went to Bob and I said, "Bob, you don't have a podcast." I said, "I happen to know a guy who could probably produce you a hell of a podcast." And he says, "Oh yeah," he says, "I know." He says, "I know you could." And he says, "And I would love to have you do it." He says, "But you got to bring the money with you." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not a sales guy." I said, what do you mean I got to bring the money with me? He goes, "Well, that just isn't an emphasis for our sales team. They're not quite geared up to do that sort of thing." And so to this day, The Hill, as far as I know, still does not have a political podcast.
See, that's why I worked in nonprofit media for so long.
You had mentioned, Bill, breaking news. That's another one of the things that have gone away, local radio. For one thing, because after the morning show is over, there's nobody live at the radio station that would be able to put a live broadcast on the air to cover breaking news. There's nobody there. It's all voice tracked from other stations, or it's national talk shows.
Yeah.
It used to be, when the station that Don and I worked at together was very local news oriented. If there was something happening, if there was a fire or an accident, I could call the station, get on, do a breaking news report. It was part of what people listened to the station for. They wanted to know
Yes.
what was happening, and they knew that they could count on us to always be there. Now there's nobody at the radio station that could pick up the phone and say, "Yeah, I'll put you live on the air."
Oh yeah.
And the people that are there, the salespeople, would not know where the studio is in the first place.
Are things looking bleak, or is there any rosiness on the horizon?
Well, I think this is a bigger problem than just radio, than just broadcasting. I think this is a problem in terms of journalism at large that we've been seeing. Look at the massive cuts that we saw at the Washington Post recently. 300 journalists let go in one fell swoop. And part of this is a distrust at the national level in some of the information we're getting that has been sown by political parties. Let's bring this into the conversation because this is part of it. And my alma mater at CBS, no stranger to that, particularly with the new acquisition. There is a lot of suspicion about the way things are being reported, and we've seen some high-level departures from CBS since the new regime took over, and that is beginning to trickle down as well. So what you're seeing now, and there are folks out there who are these quote-unquote independent journalists out there. Aaron Rupar is one of those ones who's out there in cyberspace, and I follow him. Not because I think he's a great journalist. I actually think he's got a lean and he's got a bias, which in my book does not make him a journalist anymore, but an advocacy guy. But he does pump information out into the information sphere, and he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. And so I think what's going to be hard for us as what we call trad journalists, traditional journalists, whether we be print, broadcast, TV, radio, whatever, is cutting through and winning that war, if you will. And I do think it's a war at this point, a battle at least, for information and truth, because people are going to their echo chambers now. People are getting the sources from people who are catering their feeds to cater toward that slide or that viewpoint. And I think for those of us who grew up with the idea that we're just going to tell you the truth and we're not going to throw adjectives behind it, we're going to let you decide what you think about what we tell you. That's going to be a hard row to hoe for a long time, and if we ever get it back, don't you think?
Well, what I've seen, at least on the public radio side, is that public radio is really now where, say, classical music exists. It's public radio or it's nothing. It's largely the same for jazz and for a lot of other forms of American-grown music, and it just appears to me that journalism is going the same way. That because we are free to a certain extent from any kind from a profit drive to grab a certain kind of audience, that as long as the listeners support us, as long as we can stay, and be effective at what we do, I think that public radio is probably the future for a lot of this. And I think I used to talk about this with Bill Davis, who was our former general manager at LAist, that this is kind of what we thought might happen someday. And we never thought it would when we all got started in the 80s, because commercial radio was overwhelming us. Not anymore. When the fires happened in Los Angeles, the audience for LAist skyrocketed, and we held on to that for a good long time. Now, of course, it's starting to dwindle off. But because we are sort of more willing to try things, to drop things that aren't working, because we're not driven to make certain numbers in a certain amount of time, there are things that we can do that others can't do. And just generally, we operate, our stations that, more cheaply. And I can speak from experience at cheap. But I think there is a resilience to the public side of things, and almost like a bulwark against outside influences that keeps us going. And I think that's good. And I think you will see public radio and public broadcasting in general and nonprofit journalism take a bigger and bigger and bigger part of this in the coming years.
Now, I want to add something about public radio, and that is that your audience does trust you.
Yes.
There's something about public radio listeners, and this is not I'm not doing a commercial for public radio, but it's one of the things that I admire is that people who are public radio consumers are quite loyal. I mean, they are returners and returnees, and they do it all the time.
We press on
And
that too in membership drives now. We call them sustainers.
sustainers, a very nice word. And that goes right against the loss of faith that is true, has happened in the last generation. And that pulls against it, that against the loss of faith is a segment, at least, of the listening community that has enough faith to keep coming back. So the question is how to farm that, how to extend it to maybe other venues. And I like the idea of a mix of venues locally, right? That there are two or three local, even listservs maybe, but also maybe a local radio station. I don't know if the newspapers will be there after I'm gone, but there's going to be online services that serve people in a lot of areas in this country, and if they can get the same kind of loyalty, I mean, at least public radio shows it's possible.
And I think that, one of the things that we have to do is figure out how to get a younger audience. That's been a problem the whole time. How to make that audience more diverse. And if the next people who are on air look like me, that's not good for the station. And we've known that kind of thing for a long, long time. So to move into other platforms, to deliver news in shorter bursts on Instagram or on whatever that future, delivery system is, that's where we have to be. And we also have to be, willing to collaborate with our partners. In Los Angeles, Don, you had mentioned the ratings. If you combine the morning ratings for KCRW, which is on the west side of Los Angeles, and KPCC and LAist, the morning news audience, we beat KNX. I mean, you're either listening to Morning Edition on KCRW or listening to it on LAist, but the combined audience of that one show is bigger than what KNX is doing right now. I never thought that would be the case.
One of the
Oh,
things I always admired about NPR was the fact that they could do a news story, take 7 minutes, do in-depth analysis of one particular story. I had to, I had 5 minutes to give you the world. Right now, our younger population has an attention span of 20 seconds at the
8
most.
seconds.
So that's
8.
another one of the problems. How do you keep them engaged, and how do you keep them listening long enough to engage their intellect and let them know what's happening in the world?
Well, I think one great way to do that is just to adapt to something we always do and we've done historically in radio, which is, hey, it's 10 before the hour. Bill Rakoff's in the newsroom. What do you have coming up? Well, coming up at the top of the hour in 20 seconds, I will give you the gist of a story, but I want you to listen. So now we take that model and do what the successful people are doing. And NPR is an example of this, getting on and doing Instagram reels and reaching out to the kids. And I hate to use that phrase, but I'm over 60. I guess I can do that now. And hit those with the Instagram reels along with the link that, man, if you want to know more, then come over to us and come listen to the shows where we're doing those extended reports. And God bless them, the local affiliates too. And I listen to some WYPR here in Baltimore often, and where they expand and do these wonderful pieces. But yeah, hitting them in the social media world and giving them the tease, but giving them enough that they know that if it's the only place they're going to go with those reels, all right, maybe they are going to catch them in 20-second bursts, but at least they'll catch them.
I'm wondering if we're in smaller markets and there's just not a lot of news availability around, when that tornado hits, when the flooding comes, when the problems that Nick was talking about, when those local stations came to the fore, we're right there when the forest fire came in, we're giving you the details about what was happening. If you're in a smaller market and there's no newspapers and no radio left anymore, where do you go? What do you do? You're kind of cut loose. And at that point, maybe some people might get a little pissed off and say, hey, Why don't we have anything to alert us? Why don't we have more? And maybe spur some action on a level to get that kind of stuff instituted.
The problem is people will get upset for a short period of time. If there's a critical incident, you have a major storm roll through and they're like, oh my goodness, we didn't have coverage. We should do something about it. It's like any outrage in a local community. It goes up and it comes down again because the next big thing comes along. The key is going to be getting people sustainingly concerned about that sort of thing.
Any last thoughts before we call it quits here? I think we've had a lot of interesting ideas bounced around, and of course, as with most podcasts, we're not going to solve anything, but we at least brought some ideas to the bear. And some
I would just like to get it a shot for my CBS News Radio colleagues who next month in just a couple of weeks are going to be out of work and ending a nearly 100-year run. I had the opportunity to work with some amazing people there who are trying to figure out what their next chapter is going to be. And I can tell you the mood is heavy over there on West 57th and in the DC Bureau at 2020M. Just want to wish them all the very, very best. And what a pleasure it was to work with them. And they did great work over the years. And I think Murrow and Cronkite and company would be very, very proud of them.
Yeah.
A lot of talented people.
Yeah, and maybe they'll all start podcasts. Who knows?
or start local radio stations.
There you go, Don.
That would be the best thing. That would be the best thing, is if they all said, I got a little money saved up here. Let me go to Dover, New Hampshire and start myself an all-news station.
There you go.
Cross your fingers. Hey, Bill Rakoff, Don Bryan, Nick Roman, John Timpane, thank you for all being here. And as usual, we're going to ask you out there who are listening, if you have any ideas, if you have any questions, musicalinnertube@gmail.com. Just send us an email. Thanks very much for being here, everyone. And thanks for everyone for listening. And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Or log into our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
Our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.